One conversation, three perspectives, honest debate on the stories shaping travel.
Each episode tackles a live issue, big trend, or hot debate across the travel industry.
Each week we'll be joined by guests for honest conversations, strong opinions, and lively debate.
I'm James.
I'm Andy.
I'm Will. Welcome to Let's Talk Travel.
The cruise industry's booming. Record passenger numbers, record new ships, billions being poured into new builds that won't even launch for years. But here's the question. Is cruise growing because it's genuinely the best holiday product available right now? Or is it growing because it has to? Because there are dozens of new ships that need to be filled and an industry has bet everything on capacity. And while we're discussing all things cruise, why is it when recessions hit, when wars break out, when airline costs spike, why does cruise seem to barely flinch? Today, we're asking one of the most experienced commercial operators in the travel industry. This is Let's Talk Travel. Hi, Will. Good to see you, mate. Well, today we've got a guest who we both know, but more importantly, I think is perfectly placed to help us get under the skin of this topic. The wonderful Cressida Sergent. Cress, as we all know her, is Chief Commercial Officer at Travel Tech, and Travel Tech isn't just a travel technology business, it's a cruise technology business at its core. The company built the first truly dynamic packaging engine in the industry and the first all-inclusive, fully dynamic cruise booking platform. They're right at the coalface of how cruise is bought, sold, and processed. Cress has had exec and senior roles at Expedia, Travel Supermarket, lastminute.com, and Teletext, which means she has seen this industry from almost every angle imaginable. And that's exactly what today's conversation needs, because we're going to put some big questions to Cress. But first off, let me just quickly set the scene. In 2025, the cruise industry welcomed 37.7 million ocean-going passengers. That's up 7.5% in global demand, a record for the cruise industry. First-time cruisers accounted for 31% of passengers over the past 2 years, another record that was set. And cruise remains to show further growth this year, even amidst the backdrop of one current world war, one war that's just finished, and the ongoing political and economical uncertainty across the cruise biggest markets. Remarkable. So we want to ask Cress whether these numbers tell the whole story or whether the cruise industry is riding a wave of its own making. See what I did there, Will? Wave? See what I did?
It's lovely. It's lovely, mate. It's for you. Are a genius, comedy genius.
Should work in marketing, James.
Well, before we get into cruise specifically, Cress, I've obviously had the pleasure of knowing you and working with you for over 20 years. That's quite scary. But your career spans across every corner of online travel, Expedia, Travel Supermarket, as I said. But looking back across all those industries and businesses, what's the single biggest shift you've seen in how travel is bought and sold over those past 20 years?
Yeah, thanks, James, and a pleasure to be here with you and Will today. It's interesting when I think about this, because when I started my career at lastminute.com, Brent Hobam actually did my induction, and I remember him talking to me around I had this idea for lastminute.com and people booking travel online, but I had to shelve it for 7 years because I knew that the market wasn't ready. Customers weren't ready for this. And I think that single biggest challenge has been confidence. So if you think back 20, 25 years ago, I know that seems scary, but customers wouldn't have put their credit card details into the internet. So this isn't technology, it's the confidence that I think we've seen on how people used to book, and then that became just the norm. So during my time at Last Minute and Teletext, we were kind of riding that everything's going digital wave. I think we've come through that now, and I think there is a confidence of consumers to put credit card details into systems to a certain degree with bookings, and we'll kind of talk about maybe why cruise hasn't reached those levels later as we go through this today. And then I think that confidence has been the biggest shift, but we can't ignore latterly this sudden explosion of AI that's coming in. And I think that I see parallels here to when I first joined, everybody talking about the GDSs are going to be dead, the high street's going to be dead, and now AI is going to take over the world. And I think for me, there will always be a blend of people and technology, but you will always need consumer confidence and trust. And that's why I genuinely believe that technology plays a role in the tools that we give to people to search, book, and administer any of the travel that our customers operate in. But I think that confidence is something that has been the biggest change fundamentally 25 years ago, and I consistently think that that's still there today.
Yeah, but come on, we want teletext back, don't we? I mean, all those colourful pages, and you have to wait for it to scroll. I saw a good deal, and I've got to wait for it to come round again. And was Cruise even on teletext when you were working there?
You would have had a couple of pages, and I think back to, maybe your P&O deals and your Nile cruises that you would have got for $299, $399 back in the day, because they were simple to articulate and to sell online in that medium. But I don't think anybody would have predicted the explosion of Cruise at that stage within the market.
So what took you into Cruise, and where was your sort of leap into that from everything that you'd done, and did you ever, when you got into it, did you ever see it being as big as it is today?
My first interaction with Cruise was actually, I was at Last Minute, and it was through Travel Tech, interestingly, when they tried to pitch an online solution to lastminute.com probably 25 years ago. We at the time, did sell some Cruise digitally. And interestingly, I think we were very successful with some promotions, because it's so long ago. I'm sure Paul Beale won't mind me saying that we were too successful with a promotion, and they actually pulled it from us many years ago. So I started to see then the demands that potentially was there from Cruise, but I think at that stage they probably weren't ready for the digital execution that we've seen over that time frame. And I think then there was a bit there at Text, and I started to see it through the years. But when I saw Travel Tech and the journey that Travel Tech had been on, it started to, I guess, open my eyes to the opportunity that sat there with Cruise, and the data that James shared with you at the beginning of the call, and your listeners. It's clear to see why Cruise has grown so significantly over that time period, and the numbers speak for themselves.
And when we look at the cruise industry, I've just been at CLIA and ITT conferences, and at both of those conferences, the talk around Cruise and just how much is up, and also how in demand it still remains, and how it is on course for a strong year really stands out. Yet, and I look at something that the Carnival Corp CEO said at Sea Trade, said, we're not immune to recession, but we are resilient. We're an incredible value when times are harder. People are looking to make their money go further. And I think that is quite a poignant quote around Cruise. So to you, what do you think it is that is about Cruise product that makes customers so committed, even when there are these financial constraints in the industry and on personal budgets?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. I think, first of all, it is great value for money. And I think that similar to the boom that we saw, many years ago within the all-inclusive market, people know what they're paying for up front. And so I think from a budgeting perspective, that clearly does help families. I also think that there has this perceived luxury, I think, on Cruise, that actually it's good value for money, but also it's seen and perceived, I think, as a much more upmarket product versus the resorts. I think when you speak to people, and you can't deny that actually the opportunity to wake up in different ports every day. I took my children on their first cruise holiday last year, and I was blown away watching their reactions, because they'd in the mornings be like, wow, we're in this new place. And then, we get off the ship and we go and then experience something for the day, and then we would get back on. And that, to have the ability where you could do a range of Caribbean islands, or, with river cruises, you can do those stops in wonderful European cities or around the Mediterranean, to give people, Rome and Venice and Capri and Barcelona all within a week. It's such a fantastic experience that actually you could argue that's very difficult for the resort side to be able to compete with that.
Yeah. Will?
Yeah, I mean, it quite frankly astounds me, some of these vessels, and I wonder, what's driving what. Is it Icons of the Sea actually has a bigger capacity than the population of Monaco, and these ships seem to be getting bigger and bigger. They're adding bits together, and they're bigger. They're sort of floating cities. But I'm wondering about the popularity and the demand for them. Is there actually the demand to fill these ships, or are they building these ships and then hoping it'll all catch up and they could, sort of backfill it with great deals? Because you see all these deals going out years. And that's where I have real concerns with it as a long-term business model. And it also gets rocked very easily. It's often the first kind of holiday that in a situation such as COVID, which I think we've stopped talking about, no one wants to go on the cruise ships because they're floating infection zones.
Mm. I think, as with all things, the media, they can be our friend and they can be our foe. And I think that there was genuine concern. I think when, COVID first broke out around what impact that would have on the industry, and rightly so at the time with the scenes that we were seeing. But I'm never surprised by how quick travel bounces back. I mean, James and I have lived through the lastminute.com Fleetway days of sadly bombs going off in Sharm el Sheikh and Taba. And within 12 hours, we would be sitting there watching the bookings come back through for those exact same hotels and destinations. So I think there is an element here that actually, as a market, people will always want to travel. They are very resilient to it. And I think there is an understanding now that actually we live in a world where these challenges are not going to go away, but actually people, are brave. They still want to travel. And I think it's a fair challenge because the amount of capacity that's come into the market, and you look at capacity that's growing 40% year on year, where does that finish? However, I do think the industry has done a wonderful job of bringing new to cruisers in. So if you think about 25 years ago, we would always assume it was transatlantic and, very much the old fashioned style of cruising. And whilst I absolutely think there is still a place for that, I think getting Messi onto Icon of the Seas was a genius from Royal Caribbean, and, working with Fortnite, because it's really got into the minds of younger travelers who've then been saying to their parents, I really want to go on that cruise ship and I want to try that out. And I think that it has brought a new to cruise market in there. But the thing that's really key here is that it's that repeat of cruises as well. So I had such a wonderful time last year. We've booked to go again next year, and I'm taking my parents and my brother. And that's, again, it shows you that we had such a lovely experience as a family, because it's great for young children, it's great for teenagers, but it's also really good for multi-generation as well, because you can choose whatever time you want to get up, go for breakfast. You're never short of eateries. And I was a little bit reticent going on. I went on Icon because I thought, is this going to be just a huge floating resort? But there's enough space on board that I never felt that it was crowded. I never felt like I didn't have that, that personal space. And I really enjoyed the opportunity of going to, a multitude of destinations while we were over there. So I think the cruise has done a great job of positioning itself as value. But I think that also, and this is where the agents play a really key role here, you've got to make sure that you get the right passengers on the right ship, because there's such a difference in the type of holiday that you're going to have, that fundamentally going on one particular cruise line is going to be an extremely different experience of going on another. And whilst that might sound very obvious, you need to make sure that you're giving people, because it's a big investment that they're making on these trips. You've got to get them on the right ship.
Going back to the capacity question, Bruce Poon who is the founder of G Adventures. He was speaking at ITT last week, and he feels that we are at a pivotal point in the tourism as a whole across the industry. But he did focus on cruises at one point, and say that we have increased capacity at such a level globally because we're trying to suit the demands of our boards and our investors, and everyone wants to grow, and every year you have to grow more, so you add more flights or more hotels. But there is only a point where you can grow only so far because of the amount of people traveling. And that then poses the question that if cruise continues to grow, it is ultimately feeding off another market, like the outbound travel market or the classic tour ops, fly in, flop, or the city breaks. Or is what's going to happen, are we going to see a total roof being hit across the market? Because again, profits are going to have to be made. So do you feel that the pipeline of future cruises, given I think the quote was 90 billion is invested in the future of additional cruise ships, is there enough people to simply go on these cruise ships?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a difficult balance, I think, across the board, and it's an age-old debate, isn't it, around over tourism in certain places. And I think cruise has been criticised maybe for that. But then the all-inclusive resort was criticised many years ago, that again, you have this kind of affordability from travellers, but then they get to these resorts and then they never come out and they never go to the local tavernas and the bistros and spend money within the local economies. I think the cruise industry, you come off the ships, it feels manufactured there, but at least you're going into the destinations and you are spending money. And there is always that argument that again, the cruise lines have really injected, improvements into the economies of many of those Caribbean places and communities that cruise now serves, because they've had to build the infrastructure. But then it really has given a regeneration to those places, and not to mention the employment as well from a cruise point of view that it's been able to do. But I have no doubt that absolutely when you then look at a product like G, you would be questioning that, because they're sort of at the other end of the scale there.
Yeah.
And I think that clearly the cruise market has some way to go. Renewable energies, there is a mixed bag when you listen to the investments that the cruise lines have made in terms of their sustainability pledges, which, without offending anyone, always seem a little bit somewhere in the future and a bit fluffy. But I do think that I attended actually, and I listened to Carnival actually talk around some of the challenges they have with renewable energies. And I had a huge amount of sympathy for them, because I put my technology hat on here and they talked around how it's so difficult to stop and know the best investment decisions to make here. And to your point there, James, and we're all business people and we all sit there with P&Ls and the challenge that we have to grow each year, coupled with then you need to also do the right thing. And that's a difficult balance for all businesses to strike, definitely. So I think that yes, cruise will grow. I can't answer the question as to when that ceiling will become. I think there will also be the recycling of ships. They'll go back into the dry docks and we'll see them be refurbished and sold on. And that happens, that real estate does happen across the cruise industry. But yes, of course, there will come a time where there will become too much. But I also think that you will now maybe start to see again, the investment in the private islands that some of these, cruise lines have made. I see a change here where actually it starts to become more of they're a cruise and a resort. And we're starting to see that trend come through in North America, definitely at the moment.
I love your passion. I genuinely do. But I am a little skeptical that they're creating a product that ultimately they can always put on sale. We're seeing this summer, and we've already done a podcast around it. It's a massive lates market again. I don't think that's necessarily sustainable, but owning that kind of infrastructure, you can always put on a bargain. And I wonder if that is keeping people coming back. I'm saying I understand the point that you're making in terms of they're growing a core market, people are coming back, but also people are constantly looking for that deal. And they're probably, in view of things like the recent war, hopefully concluded in the Middle East, they're looking for security as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, one of the challenges for cruise ships is obviously if you are deployed in certain places when, these challenges do happen, you've then got very expensive hardware that you have to move from these regions. And we've obviously seen that. The pattern of bookings that we have definitely seen this year, I would say the US market is always traditionally more of a lates and Caribbean style market. That has been unaffected because I think America has stayed where they are. And we've seen the Brits here really kind of, focus on more of the med and short haul. But the other thing is that, whenever ships and new itineraries come out and they're so far in advance when these ship launches happen, we always see such a big demand that again, you've got this, these future cruises coming and it's the new hardware and the new itineraries, and the demand for that shows no sign of slowing down at the moment. So, I do think that's good for industry. But I also think, well, revenue management is a challenge. And again, James and I have been through challenging times together from a trading point of view where you drop the prices to create demand and that creates other challenges. And again, I think you've got to be careful because the last thing you want to be doing is, filling ships with different blends of customers. You've got to be really clear who your core of market is and make sure that you hold the yield there, because there's nothing worse, is there, than getting on a ship and finding that someone has paid X amount less than you. And that's a real life trading challenge for these companies. Absolutely.
I'll tell you what, mate, she is aging you. You know, literally, you've been around. You two are looking very good for the grandparents of the industry, honestly.
Will. Back to our old days where we were selling those hotels in
Back in the
Sharm.
day.
Back in the day when we were selling those hotels in Sharm. That's actually a really valid point to say that when conflict breaks out, a hotel in Sharm can't just move itself and put it into a location which is then attracting tourists, where a cruise ship can. A cruise ship isn't a fixed asset, it's something that can relocate. And do you think that's been one of its advantages during this conflict, where I know obviously Celestial had ships that were caught up and weren't able to relocate, but a lot of the major cruise lines were changing their routes, adapting, and also putting on additional routes, particularly those leaving the UK.
Exactly that. And I think, listen, it's impossible to pick up a hotel, isn't it, in a certain destination, be able to move that across. You've got hardware and the capabilities of doing that. And, you know, we sit at the juncture of technology here where, you know, it quite often we'll get a call and we're going to be moving the ship. We're not going to be taking it down to Australia. We're cancelling that deployment and we're moving that hardware back to the UK or to North America because it's selling better in those markets. And they do have that ability to be able to scale up and down. And you've seen a lot of the major players, you know, APAC has had, I would say, a difficult last 12 months because they've taken inventory out of that market and placed it in other worldwide locations. But equally so, where conflict breaks out, they can move relatively quickly to be able to, you know, to divert that hardware. I speak about it on the side where we then have to deal with things very quickly. And again, you know, when COVID broke out, that was such a challenge for us as a company because you're trying to there update all of the itineraries, get that out to all of the agents. It's not as smooth as you would like to think it is behind the scenes there. So, you know, but that again, it's a wonderful capability that they had of being able to move that financial asset around and put it into places where they know that that demand is there. And, you know, thinking back, we saw the cruises, didn't we, going around the British Isles at the time. So they still found a way of getting people on holiday, but doing it in a kind of safe environment. So yeah, I do think that it's a wonderful attribute that the cruise lines have, that they can be quite agile.
Speaking from a deal perspective, what we've seen is the ex-UK departing cruises have actually rarely been put on sale. They're selling well. They're clearly yielding very well for the cruise lines, which is linked to probably the safety and the convenience factor of not traveling. But they've done well for the cruise lines. Obviously, the cruises that are on the other side of the world, those Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Asia cruises, with the lack of uplift to get the passengers out there, they're the ones who've probably suffered the hardest out of all of this.
Yeah, and I think that we also, I would say, have definitely seen a trend in the last few years of a lack of appetite from operators, which you can completely understand, to take on that packaging. So you've got some specialists that really play in that market, but again, I feel that this is where the travel agent really comes into their own. That is the you know, the fact that they can look after customers, that they package everything, they take that responsibility. And that's why, again, I think, you know, from a cruise point of view, it's so synonymous with booking with an agent, really, because it is such a complex product. But you're right, you know, out of Southampton is clearly very easy to be able to do. And again, we can see the popularity there in the data.
Well, Chris, look, it's been brilliant talking to you. We've got one question each left to ask you. So my one is, because we've talked up cruise, we've really said it's got so many opportunities for those travelers. But on the flip side, what does cruise still get wrong?
I'm going to be a little bit selfish here and say that it's on the technology side because it's a pain point in my life. But I think Cruise has done a wonderful job, I think, of marketing themselves over the last few years. I think they've created this new to cruise market. You know, Clear, I think I announced this 2 or 3 years ago when I was at a media event, that they needed to attract 4 million new to cruise users in the next 5 years. They've done a wonderful job of being able to do that. I would say from a technology standpoint, it still lags behind. And, you know, trying sometimes to keep up with the front end and the glitzy bit of marketing for the cruise lines with some of the challenges that we have behind, you know, it is always a bit of a challenge for us. but I think it has managed to break down some of those misconceptions that people have around the cruise industry. And I still hear it now when I speak to, friends and family. But I think that again, the more people that get onto a ship and have that positive experience, I feel that again they'll break down those taboos. But I think that's probably from a kind of back end and processing perspective, but I purely mean that from a technology point of view.
Okay, that leads quite nicely into my question actually, which is crystal ball time, because you sit at the intersection between cruise and technology. You mentioned AI, but fast forward 5 years, and what do you think cruise look like? Cruise looks like. What changes? What stays the same? How's technology going to help all of that? You've obviously highlighted it as a shortcoming at the moment, but where do you see it?
I think that I don't think that AI will wipe out travel agents. I think that's very naive to think that. So I think if I had a crystal ball for 5 years' time, I would say that I feel that I'm not actually convinced that that much will have changed in 5 years. I think that the one change that you will have seen, I think, is how actually customers research and do that part of the journey. Because I think that from an AI perspective, Claude is phenomenal now at being able to create and curate itineraries for you. I did a few days in Paris this year, and I asked Claude, what's the best thing to do? My children are this age, and it's fantastic what it brings back. And I think that is a challenge to a travel agent, absolutely. And that challenge is not going to go away. But I think dealing with, high touch luxury, I think where you are dealing with cruise, I think where you are dealing with tours and tailor-made itineraries, that's a real skill set and that's real experience that people bring to the table. So I think AI plays a role in the searching and that part of it. But again, it goes back to the very first point I made around there will be a blend between, human and technology. And I hope that this us and them disappears, I think, from the narrative. But I think the next 5 years will continue to be successful from a cruise point of view. I think you will start to see some of the cruise lines move more into that becoming maybe resort businesses. So you'll see them, partner with the hotels and try and maybe move into more of that tour operator landscape space that we see from the TUIs and the EasyJets of this world. So I think that's maybe a trend that I could see coming. But I think the growth of cruise definitely over the next 5 years at least will continue.
Thanks to our sponsor, Travel Zoo, the club for travel enthusiasts. Join Travel Zoo today for hand-picked deals exclusively for members.
Cress, thank you. But we can't let you go because we're going to have to put you through your paces. It's now over to Will for Talking Travel or Talking Twaddle.
Yes, Cress. Every guest that comes on here does our little quiz. It's very simple. I'm going to read out 5 statements, and you're going to tell me whether I'm talking travel, as in it's true, or I'm talking twaddle, as in it's false. So I've been either I've been really kind, or I've set you up for a massive fool, because your statements are all on the world of cruise. So you have, as we say, been in this industry a while, seen different aspects, but do you actually know your travel? No pressure, save for the fact that you surely can't be any worse than James Clark.
Oh,
so,
God.
Statement number 1, travel or twaddle, that's all I need. Cruise ships are technically not allowed to dock in their home port for more than 48 consecutive hours.
In the home port.
Gonna have to hurry you, travel or twaddle.
Travel.
That's twaddle, I'm afraid. Not a good start. Question number 2. The Queen Mary II is the only cruise ship in the world classed as an ocean liner rather than a cruise ship.
Twaddle.
That is travel, I'm afraid. It was purpose-built for transatlantic crossing with a stronger hull, distinct from the typical cruise ship design.
This is not going well, is it?
None from 2, no. Remember, 2 is that target. Question number 3. Norwegian Cruise Line was the first major line to let passengers bring their own alcohol on board.
Twaddle.
That is correct. Well done. Number 4. It's standard maritime practice for cruise ships to never be named after a person who is still alive.
Travel.
That's twaddle, I'm afraid. Come on. For a bit of pride, you cannot be lower than James. The final question. Cruise ships have their own postal code, allowing passengers to post letters from on board.
How would I know any of these answers?
You're the cruise expert.
Not on maritime law, I'm not. Letters on board. Travel?
You are an absolute technology legend, but not very good at this quiz. That is twaddle, I'm afraid. And Cressida Sergent, you have scored 1 out of 5, and I'm afraid go to the bottom of our leaderboard. But thank you for playing. Thank you for being a good sport, and thank you for all the wonderful insights and expertise you brought to today's pod.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Chris, honestly, genuinely a brilliant conversation. Thank you again. And for our listeners, if you'd like to find more about travel tech and what they're building in cruise and travel technology, the link will be included in our posts. As a reminder, please subscribe, rate and share our podcast. Head over to our YouTube page, and the link and all the details will be in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Chris. We'll see you later, mate. See you all.